Evening, folks, or should it be folk? I think we've just got one person at the moment. It's just you and me, Alex. So listen, thanks very much for joining me tonight. Should I close these curtains? I think I should actually. Give me a second. Yeah, you know the script. Watch with Mamemeister. Now, if you don't know what the hell that is, we put on some classic video, computer-based kind of TV, and we just watch it together. It seems to be quite popular. One person said they really enjoyed it, but the one thing they didn't like was the smart comments. Now I don't know whether he means the smart comments from me or from the chat, but you know what? It's what we do. You know, as I said to him, you can watch all these programs that I'm showing you. They're easily found on the internet. If you want to watch them without interruptions from a smart Scotsman, then go and watch them in that. But if you want something a wee bit different, because I'm not just going to play a video and not talk over it, that's part of the fun. So anyway, yeah, we're going to crack on with Microfile, which came out in the sort of early 1980s. It was a BBC program, and it's essentially, there was a program series called Micro Live, and what do you call it? Micro Live was, that Microfile is the best of, the utter, the creme de la creme of Micro Live. That is what this Microfile is. Now I have to warn you now, it can be a bit dry. I mean, seriously, it can be pretty dry, and it's not really computer games related at all. But if you've watched it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So anyway, let's kick off with episode 3 of Microfile. Now I want you guys just to let me know how the sound volume and or the volume balance, all that bollocks is. So here we go. It should be, at least I've teed it up, and hopefully it is going to be the right thing. This is Microfile episode number 3. How is the volume balance? Is it alright? Please let me know. I love that music. Who is that again? Is that Kraftwerk? I think it is. I'm sure somebody told me before. It's Kraftwerk. Da-da-da-dum. think we're watching in the wrong order. This is
Hello
number
and
4.
welcome to this week's Microfile, with a chance to see again some of the best items from the Micro Live series. This week we take another look at the games we've featured recently. Now, games have moved on considerably from the early days of stealing time on a mainframe to hunt the wampus. After all, up until about, 10 years ago, most computing was done in batch mode. Well, imagine trying to shoot the aliens when each keystroke had to be entered on punched card. The ability of the computer and the operator to speak to each other in real time instead of delayed time has allowed many new applications of the technology. So, just to get you in the mood, join Leslie as she plays what must be one of the best games in the world, Air Traffic Control.
Bloody hell. Keep your boom, let's play Air Traffic Control.
Bottom approach, Charlie Tango Sierra 11. Request lower airspace radar service en route for Lucas.
Charlie Tango Sierra 11, Cotham approach. What is your position, heading and level?
Charlie Tango Sierra 11 is 10 miles to northeast of Finningley. Heading 355, flight level 45.
Charlie 11, for identification, turn left, heading 325.
Turn left under heading 325, Charlie 11.
That just looks so
Charlie
green,
11 is steady
doesn't it?
heading 325.
Charlie 11 is identified, 25 miles southwest of Cotham, under radar advisory, flight level 45. Resume under own navigation to Lucas.
Cotham, Charlie Tango Tango 80. Air test complete. Request recovery to Cotham.
Charlie 80, set QFE 100... Wait! Charlie 11, avoiding action, turn right, heading 030, pop-up traffic at 11 o'clock, range 2 miles, crossing left to right. Charlie 11, correction, turn left, heading 270.
Cotham approach, Charlie 11 with lighted aboard on EMS.
Did anyone... 2 ticks.
Well, I'm very glad this isn't the real thing. I'm not doing very well on one of the RAF's air traffic control simulators. That real air miss was staged for us by 2 very experienced pilots. They use this facility to give student air traffickers a taste of the real thing. It's driven by a £2 million mainframe computer, and it uses a lot of people as well. To give just 4 students a chance to practice, you need 4 fake pilots, 4 instructors to monitor their progress, 2 supervisors, plus all the hardware and software support staff. The only other way to give them practice is to let them loose in the real control tower here at RAF Shawbury, and then to fly anything up to 6 jet provosts in the sky around for them. Both methods are extremely expensive. It's reckoned to cost around £86,000 to train 1 air traffic controller. But in a job where 1 mistake can mean utter disaster, it's essential that the students get maximum benefit each time they practice.
Alternatively, they could just play Kennedy approach on the Commodore 64.
It's a fairly dramatic jump from the theory in the classroom to going into the
Brilliant game, by
simulators
the
and
way. I
actually
never played
practicing the skills that we have taught them.
There's a tremendous amount of pressure, isn't there, in that simulator room?
Yes, very much so. And it's because of that that it was recognised that some midway point was needed, and it was identified that possibly microcomputers could bridge the gap.
The Air Force initially approached outside companies to write training software for them, but were quoted prices in the region of £250,000. So, the software now in use was written by the staff at Shaw.
Did anyone else have these army tops with the kind of padding on the top? I'm sure I had a green one and a blue one.
Shawbury on their own home micros. Turn right, heading 200. The computer imitates a radar display, and there are various exercises graded to match the stages of training. Turn left. The early exercises are simple, such as directing an aircraft to overfly a point on the screen. Well, the exercises are designed to be used by two students working together. I've been joined by a student on the current course, Dave Vardy. Dave, you're taking the role of the pilot, aren't you?
I am, yes.
Sounds like I'm taking the role of the air traffic controller. Right, what have I got up on the screen here, and what's it telling me?
And what you're trying to achieve now is that's your aircraft. You're trying to bring him into the centre of the airfield, which is there, avoiding all other aircraft on the screen by at least 5 miles.
Right.
That is one to conflict with shortly,
Yeah.
but you can tell by the length of the tail that that is longer than that one, that is a faster aircraft.
You've got to take all these things into consideration when you make your decision about which way to turn your aircraft when you take the avoiding action.
You do, but with this facility, there's a pause button, so you actually stop and think of what to do.
Now, of course, on the simulator you can't do that. It's all happening in real time.
That's right. You've got to decide what to do.
OK, well, shall I try and make a decision? The first thing I've got to decide, really, is if these two aircraft were going, where would they actually collide?
Yes.
And then try and avoid that point. Right, I'm going to turn my aircraft left. Can you turn it left for me?
You can turn it left? Onto what heading?
Onto what heading, the man said? 040.
040.
Yeah.
It's now turning left.
And will I now see a result
You're
of the
not
decisions
wrong,
I've
Alex.
made?
Yeah.
Yes, we'll also put on fast update, so you can see quickly the effect of your turn on the aircraft.
Right. Did I make a good decision there?
You kept well away from it, yes.
How far away do you actually have to keep?
You need to keep at least 5 miles.
Can you check that as well?
You can, and a 5-mile ring will appear around your aircraft.
Yeah. So really, you're in control of the micro, whereas the simulator would be in control of you.
Turn left, heading 280.
Since the introduction of the micros, there's been a marked improvement in the pass rate at Shawbury. And at least now, students can make their mistakes in private.
Snooker simulation.
The RAF are now planning to install a micro in every control tower in the country.
Here, for example, we have the kit that would be installed down at RAF St Morgan. St Morgan is based in Cornwall, and here you can see the outline of Cornwall, Land's End at the tip, and St Morgan is in the centre of the screen. Their normal day-to-day role is controlling fairly slow-moving maritime aircraft. However, several times during the year they get detachments of fast jet aircraft, and obviously there are different control procedures that the air traffic controllers have to adapt. We can set up any situation that they want, for example 6 tornadoes running in over Land's End, and allow the controllers to practice all the skills and procedures necessary to land those
reminds me of the good old flight deck.
The basic
Which I
course
got
here
for
at
my
Shawbury
Christmas.
lasts just 16
I don't know
weeks,
when it was,
but the air traffickers that they turn out
1977
are
or
acknowledged to
something.
be the best in the world. So, in the interests of preserving their reputation, I shall be taking the next flight purely as a passenger. From helicopters to phantoms. This is a new version of a game called Phantom Combat. It was written by Nick Brown
she's got her glasses
and
on.
Roger Selby. Roger, first of all, tell me a bit about the game and why the two joysticks?
Well, this joystick here is operating as a conventional joystick. This one here is just operating as a thrust lever. But you can see the reaction of the outside world above the instrument panel.
Fairly
Horrible
sensitive.
things.
But that, in fact, isn't the main difference between this and another
Nope.
flight simulator game,
No,
is it?
the real difference here is that we've actually linked these two computers together so that effectively we have two aircraft flying in the same airspace.
Now, by that, do you mean we should be able to see the plane you're flying on Nick's screen?
That's right, yes. And
There?
if you look over there I am.
Yeah.
And I'll just do a roll to the right to prove it.
Lovely
There we are.
three-dimensional graphics there.
And
as
just do
well.
a roll to the left.
Yeah.
There we are.
Lovely. Now, is it
That's
just
when
one
graphics were
program that's
simple,
working
but-
all of this?
No, it's really
Still what?
two programs, and they're sort of meshed together like gear wheels, and this lead between the two
Yeah.
is the data interchange between the two programs.
So, by the same token, we should be able to see Nick's plane coming onto your screen
That's
if
right.
he's going to go ahead of you, yes?
That's right,
Yes, I'm
yes.
just coming through now,
Yes.
so
You're
you should see me
scooping
appear.
under or over.
And he should be
I
just
think I'm
coming
coming
underneath
up.
any second
There we
now.
are.
There he is.
Yeah.
Bloody
Going into the
smooth. I mean,
distance.
that's simplistic.
Oh, what are you doing
graphics.
there?
I'm just firing at him.
Smooth it is.
That's very aggressive of you. And I hope you don't carry on like that when you're doing your day job.
My day job.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Captain.
Yes, that's right. I'm a captain with British Airways on TriStars.
Yeah. Well, no wonder
And
you've...
I don't normally do this when I'm flying my passengers around.
Glad. It
That's
would be
true.
the end of in-flight dinners and things, wouldn't
That's
it?
right.
And what about you, Nick? Have you got any flight experience?
Yes, I used to work in simulation on a tornado project, so I spent a lot of time in cockpits, but not a lot of time in the air.
Right, but what about, tell me about the graphics, the exterior graphics. How do these compare with the sort of graphics you get in a professional flight simulator?
Yes, professional flight simulator has a lot of large hardware processors to perform the visual calculations.
What does it sound?
So in this, we have to sort of take a shortcut, if you want, to produce
isn't it?
a stylized view. On the other hand, we get a very rapid response with the aircraft manoeuvring by sacrificing some of the ground detail outside.
I notice also very smooth movement as well, which adds to that feeling of realism.
That's very important. We've tried to capture the sort of realism.
Smooth because it is literally just a line.
What do you reckon, Roger? Realism from the pilot seat?
Yes, it's pretty realistic. Of course, you're not getting all the feedback, the seat of the pants feeling, but the actual way the outside world is moving and the instruments respond is very good indeed.
You've got him right in your sights. Oh no, he's out of your sights again.
You think I should shoot at him?
Yeah, go
Let's
on.
have a go.
It's tricky stuff. I mean, that's my one complaint. As a beginner, it's very difficult. I couldn't keep it off the landing strip very long. Kept crashing.
Yes, well, we cater that. We have a sort of beginner's mode, but it is still really a flight simulation experts program. It's a computer buffs, simulator buffs program, really.
And that's who it's been written for.
Exactly.
Right. Which micros have you written for?
Well, it's for the BBC, all the BBC series, any combination.
Is this
and it's really
Aviator,
what simulator buffs have been asking for years.
And when will it be available?
Which was
2
written
weeks'
by
time.
Jeff
And how much will it cost?
$19.95.
And does that include this data link?
Including the hardware link.
Right,
yes.
OK. Well, you've been flying very helpfully together so far, but of course this is really meant to go into hard combat, isn't it?
Yes, indeed.
So,
Right, I'm
flying
going to
against
get it
each
now.
other. Oh, here we go. I'll get out the way, I think. Take it away.
Here we go. No. Where are you, Nick? You've almost shot me down. I'm turning for you.
Gotcha. Success could actually go to my head, I think. No, I haven't just developed a natural new talent for this sort of game. I have to own up, I'm cheating. I'm using a device that's to be launched next Monday. It's called Game Killer, and it's a cartridge that simply plugs into the back of the Commodore 64. It costs £14.95, and basically it stops you getting killed. Now, it works
What's the purpose
like
of
this.
that?
Off it
Absolutely
goes.
nothing. Pointless.
These objects on the screen, you can see some of them there, the
They're
men,
sprites.
the bullets and the bombs are called sprites. And in the Commodore 64, they can be moved around the screen by some special hardware. Now, normally, every time two sprites collide, it registers in a particular part of the computer's memory. But with Game Killer on, it stops it from registering.
You folks are being
And that's
very,
why
very quiet
my
tonight.
little man seems to be completely oblivious to the hail of bullets. Whoopsie-daisy. There we go. But in fact, it's not quite as simple as that. As you saw there, I did actually get blown up by an explosion. You see, some of the sprite collisions may be detected by the software, and then Game Killer won't work. Now, in fact, in this game, my bullets collisions... Let's get it back up again. There we are. My bullets collisions are detected by the software, so I can still attack, which is great. But alas, as you saw, the explosions are too, so I can still get zapped by a bomb. So, which games can you use this on? Well, the manufacturers Robtech claim that it will work on virtually any game that uses sprite graphics. But we've found that all these games here, that's including some favourites like Ghostbusters
Even
and
in
Jet
David.
Set Willy,
Yeah,
are either
David's wins
completely
too.
unaffected by it or they even crash.
Wizard of War.
Now, when it does
Great
work,
game.
it means that you can get through to levels of your game that have always beaten you before. You may even discover that some of the promised levels don't exist because the programmer thought nobody would ever reach them.
I'm sure that's
Leslie
a good
there,
one.
entering the peculiarly male world of mindless games. But of course, not all games are what they call arcade
Can you
style.
say that?
There's
Bloody
another branch of computer games
predominantly
playing
male
which
world.
involves adventure and strategy. That's the text game. With very little by way of clues, except for previous experience of adventure games, they can sometimes be infuriating. But our look behind the scenes of the making of Infocom's Spellbreaker helped addicts to understand the game-creating process. The headquarters of Boston software company Infocom. The software writers are holding their regular technical meeting.
I've got this spell in Spellbreaker that's turning out to be a serious source of bugs. It's called Gurgal, and what it does is stop time.
So what's going on internally when you cast a spell? I mean, the status line updates, the interrupts run?
Yeah, everything still happens to you because time is
Like
subjective.
David Crane,
Well,
that's
in this
right.
game, time is
Evening,
subjective.
Colin.
The status line records your own subjective time, and it keeps advancing. So That's okay. The problem is just that all the interrupt routines, the things that would run periodically, like, 1 million tons of rock falling on your head, have to stop.
Infocom have won many awards for what they claim is a new art form known as interactive fiction. Their products differ from ordinary computer adventure games. The parsers are more sophisticated. That's the bit of the program that understands what you type in, so your instructions can almost be in ordinary English. And they're written to be read like novels. The company was started in 1979 by 10 adventure game addicts, who also happened to be researchers at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology.
We tried to find something small, something very manageable that we could start with. It wouldn't take a lot of work and would bring in some money and get us going. It turned out that the subject we chose, interactive fiction, did more than just bring in a little bit of money. It formed the basis of a major ongoing business.
Dave Lebling was another of the original 10. He wrote the latest game, Spellbreaker.
Spellbreaker is the third game in a trilogy in which, instead of playing an adventurer, you play a magician, and you advance from being an apprentice to being one of the most powerful magicians in the land.
A game like Spellbreaker is not written directly onto a computer. It starts life as a few ideas jotted on paper.
Initially, it's almost like writing a book. You come up with a plot. This is a civilization founded on magic, and magic has stopped working. And then you start thinking of logic puzzles and things which will advance the plot and at the same time provide intellectual stimulation for the people who are playing it.
The games are coded in a language called ZIL on a mainframe development system. ZIL stands for Zork Implementation Language, Zork being the name of Infocom's first product. And it's a descendant of the artificial intelligence language Lisp.
What makes ZIL special for that is that the language itself knows a lot about interactive fiction. And when I say knows, I mean built into the language are a lot of tools for manipulating objects and characters so that each writer doesn't have to start from scratch. Writers and programmers aren't necessarily the same sort of creatures. And you really want to give people who are writers the best tools you can to help them write interactive fiction. Because, as you say, it isn't like just writing with a pencil on a piece of paper.
But not everyone at Infocom gives the writers an easy time.
Debuggers, testers, their job is to make my life miserable. And in fact, they've done such a wonderful job of it that they have filled up an entire book with bugs from my game. And so far, they have contributed over 250 pages of bugs of my game. Just 5 bugs per page, pages and pages and pages.
Dave, I've got this great bug.
I wouldn't doubt it.
You walk into the octagonal room, and they're describing the 8 sides of the walls and the runes, and it gets to the south wall, and it just goes crazy. It says south, 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 and it just goes on for pages, and it doesn't stop.
What happened is I rewrote the thing that prints which walls have runes on them and tells the directions, and I bet I forgot to make it.
It looks a wee bit like Steve Martin, just facially.
It's probably something very
the white hair, but...
So why is it not terminating? It really ought to work. Oh well.
While Lebling wrestles with the bugs, the designers are putting the finishing touches to the Spellbreaker box. Infocom are renowned for their clever packaging, which often contains clues to help solve the puzzles. But strangely, the visuals don't extend to the screen. Infocom games are purely text.
I think there are no graphics in interactive fiction for the same reason that most novels that you pick up in the store don't have graphics either, which is that the goal is basically for you to use your imagination to picture the scenes rather than trying to depict everything for you. And I think especially since most of the stories are sort of imaginative fiction anyway. I think to some extent, if you look at the quality of graphics that you can get on your Apple or your IBM, what you mostly get are cartoon-type graphics.
And a more commercial reason may be that without graphics, a condensed version of the compiled ZIL code can be tailored to run on virtually any micro, just by adding a short interpreter program.
When a new machine comes out, we get a different bunch of people, which are in our microcomputer support group, to write this relatively small program, this interpreter program for that new machine. And in fact, that's what we're doing now for the new Atari machine and the Amiga machine, which Commodore just announced. And in fact, it's a very small process. It's just a couple of months. And once that little interpreter program is written, our whole product line will then run on that machine without modification.
And finally, a sneak preview of one of the problems from Spellbreaker.
In one point in the game, there is an idol, a temple containing a basalt idol of great size and ferocious aspect. And you climb up the idol and look in its mouth. And when you look in its mouth, you find that indeed in the idol is a cube. Except when you try to reach it, you find that there's not enough room for your arm to fit between its razor-sharp teeth. So the problem is, how do you get this silly cube out of the idol's mouth? For example, I tried taking it.
Does anybody think that there is a market for text adventures? Would any of you guys play a text adventure if it came out? Like I says, I never played them back in the day. I'm sure there probably would be some people that would want to play them. Interesting point. Anyway.
You couldn't, so I can try open the mouth, and it says, not a chance. I can try hit the mouth with the knife. Now I have a knife. It says, I've known strange people, but fighting a mouth, that's silly. You could try magic. There's a magic spell, which opens things. It says there's no hinge there. You can't open something without a hinge. It's not a door. So the problem was how to do it. And in fact, I was stumped myself. I came up with this idea. I invented the idol. I invented its mouth. So I thought about it for a while. I couldn't come up with an answer, so I talked to the other writers and got, as it turned out, some very good suggestions. For example, Steve Moretsky, who wrote some of our other games, said, well, you know, if you yawn, you're going to open your mouth. So that brought up the question of, well, how do you make a stone idol yawn? Which led to yet another possible additional complication, which is that you had to make the idol come to life, to animate, and then make the silly thing yawn. So in fact, that's what we implemented. So I would say Malion the idol. Malion animates an inanimate object. And it doesn't work. A bug immediately. Oh, of course. Yes, I know exactly what I did wrong. Stupidly, I'm sitting on the idol, and I brought it to life. Now, if you had a flea on you, you would find it and eradicate it pretty quickly. Well, the idol did exactly the same thing to me. Just goes to show that the writers of the games can't play them any better than anyone else.
Well, there's hope for us all. Infocom don't see the need for graphics in an adventure game like Spellbreaker, but that's probably an opinion based on necessity, since there's very little room available in most home computers for anything but the simplest pictures. But the new generation of home micros with 0.5 megabyte of onboard memory opens up new possibilities, and there were some splendid graphics in this game, which I reviewed for the Atari 520 ST. Well, it's like most adventure games, but it's got a very sophisticated parser. A parser is the part of the program that understands what you type in. For example, look at this sentence here. Put the key in the hat on the tree stump. Now, taken in isolation, that could mean two things. Put the key that is in the hat onto the tree stump, or put the key into the hat on the tree stump. Now, most adventure games would hiccup loudly, but this one knows from the context there's no hat on the tree stump, so I can only mean one thing, and it interprets it as the blue key is now on the tree stump. It knows what I mean. The game is full of very nice little touches. There's an on-screen editor, which means that if I'd mistyped just one letter in that sentence, I wouldn't have to type it in all over again. And, well, we've all seen pull-down menus, but what about this? They've redesigned them as pull-down scrolls. Very nice. And when you let go of them, they roll back up. But best of all are the graphics. Nice one, Rainbird. Next week's show takes a closer look at the Commodore Amiga and some interesting 3D graphics. Robots and benchmarks also feature in a program that asks, what is power? Until then, goodbye.
Right, the next one isn't going to be that one because I've played them in the wrong order. That was episode number 4. So what we're going to do is play episode number 3. We'll just let this finish because this is called the highlight of the actual program. This is the intro and outro music. Right, this is episode number 3 of Microfile. Come on, why is it not playing? Why is it not playing? That is weird. Hang on a wee second. It was working absolutely fine earlier on. Hang on a wee second. Let me just. Yep, that should be. Oh, wait a wee minute. Hang on. I don't know what's going on here. Just give me 2 ticks. No idea why that's. It was working absolutely fine earlier on. Let me try and. Alright, number 3. Hopefully this is going to play. The STM, I had the STFM, which I think had the built-in floppy into rocks.
Hello, and welcome to this week's Microfile, which gives you and me a chance to see again some of the best ideas from the MicroLive series. Now this week we are putting together a few historical pieces. 10 years ago, the best present that you could give an aspiring scientist would have been one of these, whereas now a calculator, like this one, would cost literally next to nothing. And this fact represents the progress in miniaturization that's been made since computing started in earnest after the war. Our American reporter Freff visited the Museum of Computing in Boston and found, by the way, how important defense has been in the history of computing.
Boston has long been a center for research and development in computing and is the East Coast's answer to California's Silicon Valley. But it's also a city with a sense of history, so it's perhaps appropriate to find, next to the famous Boston Tea Party Harbor, in a converted warehouse, the world's first computer museum.
They've got to love early computers, haven't they? Can anyone recommend Tex Adventure? I know we're talking about the last episode.
The museum opened here in November 1984. Its collection features such highlights as the first object ever designed on a computer, this rather dull ashtray, a somewhat premature tombstone for the computer language COBOL, and even a display of animals built from leftover components and used in America in an advertising campaign.
This was 1984. I'm guessing this must be coming out. This must have come out in 1985.
The oldest computer on display in the museum is Whirlwind, developed in 1945 at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It cost $5 million to build and filled 2 very large rooms. This is one of the original modules. The U.S. Navy used it as a primitive flight simulator, and later it served as a prototype for the next computer on display, the Q7. The Q7 was the largest computer ever built, weighing nearly 175 tons. It used over 55,000 vacuum tubes ranged in 7-foot-high racks. Each of these tiny cores stored a single bit of data, giving the Q7 a total working memory of just 64K, the same as a small home micro today. There was also backup storage on huge magnetic drums that rotated at over 90 miles per hour and had to be constantly monitored against overheating. Each held about the same amount of data as a modern floppy disk. The Q7 was all a real computer should be, lots of switches and flashing lights. And it can also claim to be the longest-lived computer ever. It was built in 1958 as part of the American Air Defense System and, amazingly, was still in operational use in 1983, 25 years later. The control room, where the technicians tracked aircraft and missiles on bulky cathode ray tubes, was bathed in a vivid blue light, and there was even an early attempt at user-friendliness. Each console had its own light pen.
The fighters lock on target, and rockets are fired.
This was a breakthrough. Not this, this. It's Digital's PDP-8. The first ever computer you could plug directly into the mains. It ushered in a whole new era of powerful mini-computers. Much more powerful and much larger was Iliac 4, an early supercomputer. Its 64 processing elements, this is one, were the first to use solid-state memory chips. It cost over $100 million and consumed a greedy 500 kilowatts of power. The museum has devoted one of its galleries to computer graphics. This is perhaps the earliest example. It's a cloth portrait woven on a jacquard loom, a device that was programmed with punched cards. The first visual display units, huge cathode ray tubes, nestle up to the very latest plasma screen technology. Plasma screens work by using a grid of wires to energize tiny pockets of fluorescent gas. Ever wonder why so many computer graphic images have teapots in them? In 1974, a computer scientist named Martin Newell needed a simple curved shape for some imaging tests, and he happened to have this teapot on his desk. So he laboriously photographed and measured it, then entered all the coordinates into his computer. Other researchers, rather than repeat that effort, simply borrowed Newell's data, and a flood of simulated teapots was unleashed upon the world. Behind this glass is Martin Newell's original teapot. And in the computer alongside, Newell's data is processed to produce a matching picture. This section of the museum is dedicated to the evolution of the personal computer. Set your time machines for a long while ago, 1975. That's when this came out, the Altair 8800 microcomputer kit with a mind-boggling quarter K of memory. 2 years later, you could buy this Commodore PET 2001. Although a look at its keyboard shows it's still more for techies than typists, it did have an onboard cassette recorder. Here we have the Radio Shack TRS-80. We call them trash 80s here. The Honeywell kitchen computer, a failed consumer product. Very few housewives wanted to spend $10,000 to catalog their menus. But here was a winner. This board had two major innovations. First, its processor and its memory were together on the same board. That had never been done before. And secondly, it had BASIC built-in on a ROM chip. It's the Apple I. And when hobbyist Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak built this, they had no idea they were about to spawn a multinational corporation.
No, Steve Wozniak, I don't think Steve Jobs had anything
Over
to
here
do
we've
with
got the Osborne One, first portable microcomputer, and two British machines, the Sinclair ZX80 and ZX81, which broke price barriers and introduced thousands to computing who would never have otherwise discovered it.
Well, the one thing which made mass computing possible is the development of ever cheaper memory. Over the past 15 years, the cost of computer memory has halved each year. In order to demonstrate the development of memory, we're going to take as a reference a page from a telephone directory. This marked area has about 1,000 characters. That's about 1K of computer memory. Well, one of today's typical home micros would have about 64K of internal memory, so it could store about 5 pages of a telephone directory. And the average floppy disk stores about 300K, so that's about 30 pages.
In the early days of computing, things were far from easy. The processor and the memory it could deal with at any one moment consisted of hot thermionic valves, which acted as electronic switches. If one failed, the program crashed. Turn the machine off, and all the data disappeared. Ever since computers were invented, everything they do has been based on the ability to store bits of information using those electronic switches. It took 2 of these valves to store just 1 bit of information. As 8 bits make up 1 byte or 1 character, 16 valves were needed to store it. To hold a stream of bits while they were being processed and so cut down on the number of valves, early machines used things called delay lines, either mercury columns or, as here, coils of wire into which sound or stress waves were sent. A bit would be sent in at one end at the speed of sound and be read at the other if it was needed. If not, it was fed in to go round again. Another invention which helped the machine store information as it worked was the magnetic drum. It spun round, and rather like a disk drive, information could be recorded on its surface and read back by these heads. This one can hold just 4 kilobytes of information. Using this kind of working memory, commercial computers appeared in the mid-50s.
One of the earliest business computers in Britain was Leo, the Lions Electronic Office, used in the mid-1950s by Lions tea shops and other organisations like the Ford Motor Company to do their payrolls. It was the beginning of the mass use of the computer for data processing, without which big business today simply couldn't operate. This first-generation machine had thousands of hot valves, many of which had to be changed as they burnt out.
For an hour a day, Leo belongs to its engineers for maintenance and testing. The voltage, normally kept to the operating figure, is made to fluctuate. Any valve or other component which can operate in such conditions is certainly fit for another 24 hours useful life. And if it cannot, then now is the chance to change it.
Information about salaries, for example, was fed into the computer using punched cards. Preparing these cards was one of the most appalling jobs ever invented, and now happily just about gone. And information could be saved on the external or backing store, generally punched paper tape, for feeding into the machine again. Both the program and the data was fed in from these cards or tape.
A new form of memory device for the inside of the machine came along in the 50s, core memory, tiny magnetic rings threaded by wires. In this picture, you can see the construction. Each magnetic core is capable of storing 1 bit, depending on whether it's magnetized one way or the other. Its drawback was that in reading the memory, you had to change the way that individual cores were magnetized. This destroyed the data, and so it had to be reset. Core memory, though, was fast and reliable. And incidentally, it was non-volatile. Switch the machine off and the data was still there. Because they're so reliable, they're still being used here in the studios at Television Centre to store information about the lighting. Stacks of these cores made up something like this, the 1960s equivalent of the 16K RAM, or about 1.5 pages of our phone book.
Well, the valve had got a bit smaller, but it was still unreliable. Fortunately, in the 1960s, the transistor took over, but it still took 2 of these to store 1 bit of information, so computers were still large, though they were more reliable and made use of the new printed circuit boards.
From this complex neatness stems a computer of the 2nd generation, which offers forward-thinking organizations a comprehensive data processing system at low cost. Here, then, is the 1301, with fast data handling based on a megacycle pulse rate, large internal storage capacity based on immediate access core stores and drum backing stores, comprehensive magnetic tape facilities with full error detection are available, and there is a choice between 2 magnetic tape systems. A high-speed 1-inch magnetic tape system working at 90,000 digits per second, or a standard system on half-inch tape working at 22,500 digits per second.
That sounded like an early Richard Baker to me. Well, in the early 60s, the significant development was the integrated circuit. Thousands of transistors and other components, now microscopic in size, could be put on the surface of a single piece of silicon. Magnified, it looks like this. You can see the thousands of components. And with high enough magnification, we can see a single transistor. Since the early 70s, every year the capacity of chips has doubled and the cost halved. Today we have a single memory chip like this which holds 2 million bits, or about 25 pages of our directory.
And backing store has developed from tape to disk. Each of these hard disks can hold at least 10 megabytes. A megabyte is 1 million characters, so 10 megabytes is just about 1 telephone directory. Some disks, of course, can hold up to 5,000 megabytes. Recently announced is this compact disc memory, which works on a modified form of the domestic compact disc player. but you can only read from this form of memory, not record. However, the latest backing store is this 12-inch double-sided Laserdisc, on which you can both read and record. At the moment, though, you can't record over existing data. This holds 2 gigabytes, that's 2,000 million bytes, or if you like, 200 directories. The trouble is, it's still very slow in the computer's terms, because it still depends on a mechanical system to find the data and transfer it to the main computer memory. Many of tomorrow's computer tasks, like speech recognition and so on, are going to need much faster processing with enormous amounts of memory which can be accessed directly. So the search is on for fast memory which can do justice to those super processors.
Faster processors, laser discs, technology is, of course, changing rapidly. But there is still no overall pattern. Manufacturers design hardware with little regard for each other. So getting computers to communicate with each other is still far too difficult. In fact, promises of an easy-to-use, integrated system of micros, telephones and mainframes are still unfulfilled. In March '86, MicroLive looked at the whole bugbear of incompatibility. And with a little bit of luck, some of this is history already.
And we start our stroll down incompatibility lane right here in the home. Now, if you've got a home micro, you'll know that if you want to exchange software with a friend who's got a different machine, you can't. They're just incompatible. If you try to load this game, Elite, which is for the BBC, try to load that on the Commodore here, well, the disc fits, that's a good start. Attempt to load it up, it's searching for Elite. No, file not found error. Similarly, of course, the Beeb couldn't read a Commodore disk.
Well, things are just as bad in the business world. The two standard operating systems, CP/M and MS-DOS, are quite different. For a simple job like copying a file from one disk to another on this machine running under CP/M, we type pip A:/file B:/. Whereas on this machine running under MS-DOS, we type copy A:/file B:/. Very confusing and quite unnecessary.
And even where machines have the same operating system and claim to be similar, there can be problems. The IBM here and the Apricot over here, for example, use different sized disks. The keyboard layout is different. Those all-important function keys, for a start, are on the other side. Most importantly, there's no guarantee that software written for, say, this machine would run on this one, even if we could load it. But the situation is even more bizarre than that. Sometimes software won't run on different models from the same manufacturer. And you can't link programs together, not unless you're a software genius. For example, supposing I've been using this popular word processor package, and I want to incorporate this graph from Lotus 123 into my letter, and that's not an unreasonable request. Well, no can do, it's simply incompatible.
Communication between machines, except at the very simplest level, is still very difficult. The reason differences in what's supposed to be a standard for connection of modems. For example, this lead connects into this Apricot OK, but it won't connect into this Macintosh. And even when you get the hardware to work, the software may prevent micros talking to each other or to mainframes. To communicate anything other than at a very simple level is really quite tricky.
Electronic mail is very quick, very convenient, but the 5 major systems are all incompatible. If you're on one system, you can't send messages to somebody on another
give Windows
unless
a hard
you use
time,
telex.
Microsoft a hard time.
The electronic mail service, 121, who have 20% of the UK market, launched a charter for compatibility. But Telecom Gold, who've captured 70% of the market, refuse to commit themselves to it. Now, Telecom Gold is part of the international Dialcom system. But we've taken this portable with its acoustic couplers to the USA, and there the things just don't work. Even if you do get the right modem, you can't access your mailbox back in Britain unless you make very expensive and special arrangements well in advance.
Well, truly portable phones have appeared recently. This one actually has a data socket. Non-standard, of course.
Of course it's
non-standard. This one here, that doesn't have one. But you can't use either of them outside Britain. Not yet, anyway. Standards haven't been agreed, and even within Europe, the BT predict that they aren't likely to be established until the early 90s. And so it goes on. It's a bit like the world where every car uses a different sort of petrol and even different controls. Now, there's little reason why most of these problems can't be resolved given some time. In some cases, the technology isn't good enough for a standard to be agreed. But in most, it's commercial competition or even simple muddle that's holding things up.
So technology is moving rapidly in many directions at once. And although standardisation may be the cry, it is not an idea finding much response from the manufacturers at the leading edge, because standardisation means using yesterday's technology. But although all this talk of hardware is very exciting, even exhilarating to some people, there are those that see computers and the rise of information technology in a different light altogether.
Well, it was something completely different to what I imagined, because I couldn't really imagine anything. I'd never heard of a computer or seen a computer or knew anything about it. When I first walked in here, it was rather bewildering because everything was so modern.
Since they were introduced into business in the 1950s, computers have created a mixture of fear and fascination. Although crude and unreliable, early machines like Leo helped companies to automate both their payrolls and their internal accounting. Jobs appeared in the new world of data processing, with its own band of high priests and acolytes who fed and maintained the machines. Big companies were able to expand as computer automation brought greater efficiency and savings. But some of the savings were in paper shuffling jobs like these, which computers have now made unnecessary. Endless rooms full of people processing data by hand simply weren't needed anymore. Business was quick to start using computers for accounting, but British industry's take-up of computers for automating production was slow.
How fast do you see these processes coming in?
Woodrow Wyatt
well, not
interviews
fast
some
I would like. Of course, they've been coming ever since mechanisms and power was first used by men. They're coming inevitably, I think, at an accelerating rate. The speed at which they come will, in fact, determine the speed at which we improve our standard of living.
Inertia by management was matched by real fear of jobs being de-skilled by the machines. For instance, British Steel at Rotherham installed a computer to control the furnaces.
We asked two of the senior melters if they thought there was as much satisfaction in the job now that a computer was taking a share in it.
No, I don't think there is.
I should think it's like automatic pilot on an aeroplane. If he just sits back and lets it have a go, I don't know there's any more satisfaction in that, is there?
I think you like to think that you're in charge of a thing and that at the end of it you've achieved something.
At a time of full employment, a debate was beginning about the long-term effects of automation. In 1966, it reached television.
Two main points of view emerge. In the simplest possible terms, one is optimistic and the other pessimistic. Now, the optimists think that in a situation of nearly full employment, which is what we have at the moment, when you move automation into an industry, you release workers who are so badly needed that they enable other industries to expand and start producing goods which raise the general level of prosperity. The pessimists, on the other hand, fear that a situation could arise in which workers displaced by automation from one industry fail to find jobs because all the other industries are doing the same thing, installing machines and turning out the men.
You would never believe that
chronic, wide-scale, even lifelong unemployment for millions.
You wouldn't have, you
we
would
could
just scan
have
your own messages.
Something like 1 in 8 out of work in the early 1970s because of automation, if we sat back and did absolutely nothing. This is about sort of 3 million, and this represents, if you like, a kind of rate of redundancy of between 200,000 and 300,000.
In the 70s, a new factor appeared, the silicon chip. By drastically cutting computing costs in half each year, it now made personal computing possible. Long before the IBM personal computer appeared, word processors and personal micros were signalling change. Pundits began to predict that computers would affect whole new areas of office work, destroying jobs in the hitherto protected service sector. In the late 70s, even in Germany, the unions were calling the silicon chip the job killer. In Britain, white-collar unions like ASTMS were clearly very worried, as their public campaign showed.
Overall, it must mean a diminishing of the number of jobs available, not only in the UK, but in every industrialised country, in Europe, in the United States, absolutely everywhere. It will also go on over a considerable time period. This diminishing will go on perhaps over 20, 30, maybe even up to 50 years.
Well, the unemployment situation is now worse than predicted, but the cause is as much the world's slump as any wholesale use of new technology by British management. But the integration of the new technologies into our working lives is a topic that we shall come back to on MicroLive in the future. Next week, it's a total contrast, with a programme devoted to the computer game, which has also advanced a little from the basic game of tennis that was enthralling us just a few years ago. Until then, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, folks, that is it. That is episode 3 and 4 of Microfile. I should hopefully be back next Wednesday for another couple of episodes. So listen, thank you very much for everyone that tuned in tonight. Hopefully you do enjoy it. Yeah, until next time, guys, as always, see you.